So yeah, welcome back to the channel. I'm delighted to be joined by Nuriyah Khan, also known as the Holy Humanist on YouTube, who is an ex-Muslim. I don't know how you identify now. Would you say you're atheist or agnostic or?
I'm an atheist, but I call
And,
myself an ex-Muslim atheist just so that the label sticks.
and an ex-Muslim atheist, British-Pakistani. So I say, really appreciate you speaking to us. Very grateful for your time. So I suppose the obvious place to start is kind of your background and your family life. I understand you grew up in a religious household and spent a lot of time in the UAE and Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, that's right. I grew up in a kind of moderate to traditional, conservative British-Pakistani family. We lived as pretty much like a joint extended family with my grandparents. So the more religious side came because my granddad was obviously, um, as with the cases of many Muslims and Pakistani men, I guess, as they get older, they tend to get more religious.
Mm,
So my grandfather had kind of really pursued his faith more, and he had become the imam of our local mosque where we lived. And just by virtue of how close I was to him, I would kind of go to the mosque a lot when he was there, and I'd kind of put myself forward for like Quran recital competitions and spend a lot of my free time there and want to get the perfect Arabic pronunciation, obviously with a view to, make him happy and make him proud. But it made me really lean into my religiosity at quite a young age.
yeah.
Um, but then, as you said, when I was 9 years old, and sorry, just before that, I leaned into it so much that at nine, by virtue of those Quran classes where my Quran teacher encouraged us that, at nine, a girl's life changes according to Islam, and you're supposed to cover up and you're supposed to start praying and fasting. So I took those words very seriously, and I wore the hijab at 9 years old in my little primary school, walking around um, in religious education RE classes. I would kind of volunteer for everything Islam related. And then
Is there
shortly
some?
after,
Sorry
sorry,
to
go on.
interrupt. Is some
That's okay.
particular significance about the age 9 for kind of when a girl should start doing this stuff?
I believe so, yeah. And I think it's got a lot to do with Muhammad's child bride, Aisha,
Okay.
and the fact that although it says in the Sunni literature that he married her at nine, he waited to, and I hate the word consummate, but he waited to, take the marriage further and essentially sexually abuse her at 9 years old.
Yeah. And that's where the kind of the importance of the age 9 comes from, even kind of in contempt. Because I know there are some Muslims who say that I know it comes from one of the Hadithas, and there are some Muslims who say that it shouldn't be taken literally. I'm sure you've heard this argument
Yeah,
that she may well have been older, but if you sort of take the words literally, it does say that she was 9.
absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, that's why I took it so seriously as well. And I was wondering why all the other kind of women, the older women around me, weren't, taking it as seriously, because that is part and parcel of your religious duty in order to get to heaven. I mean, it's mandated from the Quran itself. So I was kind of dumbstruck as to why I was the only one following it to the
Mm,
T. But shortly afterwards, we relocated to Saudi Arabia, and that kind of gave me a different view of how Islam operates. We were actually going to the house of Islam, and more importantly, the house of Allah, according to
yeah.
Islam. So that felt like a mad blessing at the time, but yeah, that kind of pushed me ironically in the other way eventually. But yeah, living in Saudi Arabia and Dubai had its own impact on me.
I mean, how did you find British Islam and Saudi Islam varied?
So obviously in hindsight, so Saudi Islam initially felt very intense. Like as soon as I
Mm,
got there at nine, I was like, well, pardon this hijab, I don't really need to wear this and kind of show my identity because Islam is all around us. You hear the call to prayer 5 times a day. We've got the religious, when I was there, it was quite like the religious police was still, around, and they would walk around with their sticks, and they
yeah.
would enforce kind of mandatory dress codes. They would make men stop on the side of the road when it was prayer time and walk into the mosques. So all of it felt quite like regimental and in your face, so to speak. There was a lot of gender segregation. Women couldn't drive, and I thought this was a very intense kind of version of Islam. And when I'd questioned my parents about it, because there were even darker things like, executions post the Friday prayers, which you're just supposed to normalize there as a young child, that this is happening, or, people's arms and legs are being chopped off for various crimes after you do something as holy as praying on a Friday, which is a sacred day. So my young mind was questioning these things, and my parents kind of brushed it off as like, this is some extreme Wahhabi Islam. It's not really the Islam we follow, but it did kind of sow seeds in my mind as to these are the gatekeepers of Islam, and they're acting like this. So
Mm,
surely they're following, something that they know should be followed in this way. Whereas British Islam for me at that point seemed a lot more like you need to show your Muslim identity because it needs to trump your identity of being British, if that makes
yeah,
sense. Like,
yeah,
I don't know if I'm conveying that well, but yeah, for me at that young age, it was like, I think the reason I wore hijab and stuff was to be like, what's the differential between me and a completely English person, because I am British, but like there needs to be some marker here because my values are a bit different. We don't walk into pubs, we don't eat pork, like
yeah.
all of these things exist.
There's a lot of pressure on you to identify primarily as a Muslim rather than primarily as British. Did you have non-Muslim friends as a child? Did you that kind of
Oh yeah.
spark something that this is not everyone's going through what I'm going through? How did that work?
So I had a lot of like in our local area, I had a lot of people who were at the same mosque as me, and it's quite reinforced because there were quite a lot of Pakistani families around, and so they all had the similar mindset. But obviously, going to a normal primary school in London, I did have friends from everywhere and different faiths, and obviously, I was quite sporty, and I wasn't really your typical kind of good Pakistani young girl. Like I had a lot of guy friends even at a very young age, and I would go to their house for Christmas dinners and things like that. And I was allowed to. I was just told like you're not supposed to eat the pork if it's pork and check what it is. Um, but it was not until I moved to Saudi Arabia and I genuinely met people from the world over. And I
Mm,
realized even within Islam, there are so many different sects, which I didn't really know about here. I just knew about Sunni and Shia. Going to Saudi Arabia, and I realized how even other sects within Islam, whether you were Ahmadi or Ismaili or Druze are not even considered Muslims, but um, even how the Shias were treated by the Sunni Wahhabi Saudis made me think, wow, there's even so much division with Islam. We're not just some unified ummah that are on the right path. So again, hearing about all these other faiths and seeing how people played out their religion really kind of influenced me to step back from being so confined to my own religion.
and because this was you went to an international school in Saudi, so this is how you kind of met so many people of different faiths and different backgrounds and stuff. You mentioned the chopping, the chopping after prayer, was it? Is that a punishment? Was that specifically a punishment for theft, or was it used for other things as well? You have to forgive my ignorance here.
Yeah, no, no, it was, I mean, theft is definitely one of them. So depending on which hand you've stolen from, that hand gets chopped off.
Oh,
And there's different levels of like punishment for various things. So there could be people also getting those punishments for like having, drugs found in their possession or intent to sell, or probably even punishments for like blasphemy and apostasy. I just never um obviously thankfully I never got that close to it to see exactly what they were doing in terms of their punishments, but you would hear them call out a name, say the crime in Arabic, and then carry out the punishment. So the ones that my dad and my brother happened to hear when they had come back from the Friday prayers was just mostly for theft, like petty theft. And
mm,
that's why in Saudi Arabia at that time, you could literally be driving your Lamborghini and leave it with the key in the engine and go about your shopping and come back, and no one, in theory, would have, stolen it because the punishment is so severe.
yeah. I mean, going off on a bit of a tangent, but obviously Saudi Arabia's been going through massive changes over the past sort of decade or so with MBS, Mohammed bin Salman. And I know he's completely defanged the morality police. I don't know if you still sort of have contacts in Saudi Arabia and can say how much things have actually changed on the ground, and kind of what you think of MBS's reforms. Because, I mean, from the outside, it looks incredibly dramatic. It's something they've got cinemas, you've got women dancing, you've got a comedy festival in Riyadh. But I don't really know for people kind of on the inside how much has actually changed.
Yeah, so I do have people who are still kind of there on the ground and live there, or people who go there now and then for business. And I will say, obviously, Saudi has changed even a lot since I was there. I mean, you're allowed to mix a lot more freely now.
Yeah,
When I was there, if you were even caught with somebody of the opposite sex who you weren't related to, and I went to an international co-ed school, so if we were to even go to a restaurant afterwards, but we were seen walking around a mall, the religious police would come and separate you if you weren't related. But that's definitely not the case anymore. There's a lot more free mixing. I'm sure you've seen like celebrities have gone there to do concerts and what have you. But yeah, I think it's also important to remember that, like, for example, even women driving, it was such a long, hard fight that was fought. And the actual women that first fought for women to drive had been in jail and then under house arrest for so long. So when the law actually passed that women could drive, they were still under house arrest. I forgot the name of the exact activist. I think her name was I forgot their family name, but there's two sisters, and they were essentially pioneering this movement, and they never even got to enjoy the fruits of their labor. So a lot of it seems like, it is performative. Like, yes, you've got these small wins. Yes, you're opening up slowly. I think MBS realizes that in order to keep up with, the modern world and maybe take some lessons from the way that the UAE, especially Dubai, has gone, you need to kind of have one foot in modernity, and you need to allow for, they've got the snooker championships happening there now. They've got like the boxing matches that are happening there. But it's still very odd in terms of how it plays out because, of course, you can't change things overnight. So,
mm,
they are kind of clubbing, but they're clubbing with kind of no alcohol around and being still quite covered up, and the men are above and the women are below. But yeah, I do think obviously MBS is trying. He's even tried to, you know, infringe on where so essentially Saudi Arabia was like the religious police enforce what the theologians, like the actual sheikhs and the religious scholars of Saudi Arabia, deem as like the actual law, and then the monarchy is just the safeguarding like kind of element in between.
yeah,
MBS has tried to kind of step on the toes of the religious clerics and say, actually, there's loads of these hadiths within the Sunni literature that we don't need to abide by and we don't need to follow, because a lot of them are quite dubious in terms of their legitimacy, which is huge. Like, that was probably when he first said that, a lot of us in the ex-Muslim community were like, is MBS secretly also like, going down this path of starting to believe less in Islam? Because have saying something like that 20 odd years ago would be deemed absolutely like, the most blasphemous thing. It's that body of text is so sacred in the Sunni literature, because you're actually then throwing away material essentially of what Muhammad has told you need to live as a Muslim.
yeah. Oh, and I've heard the argument that MBS is moving sort of as fast as you practically can without actually inciting a Wahhabist rebellion. And that while things are still far from perfect, the reforms are making sort of real progress. I mean, is that a fair summary, or am I overdoing it?
Um, no, I think obviously because he has to tread carefully. Like I said, it is just walking a very, very tight rope. And I do think yeah, I think that is a fair assessment, but I also think that, with that is still there is still the underbelly of trying to whitewash things and sports wash things, and really severe human rights questions around violations and modern slavery and all of those things that still exist. I think there's just a little bit of a front you're trying to show the world, because eventually you know that your oil will run out. And Dubai has been seen in the Middle East as a kind of success case when it comes to, you've got tourists there. They Dubai, people say work hard, play hard. So all these Brits go out for a tax-free lifestyle, but they're brunching and getting absolutely sloshed off their face on the weekends.
Yeah.
And within a Muslim country where you still hear the call to prayer and Sharia law effectively governs in many degrees, but Saudi Arabia was realizing it was falling behind. So I think MBS is like, right, we need to show on a public level that we are moving forward in these ways. And he's young. He's a lot kind of younger than the previous leadership. And I think he is trying to do what he can without, like you said, causing an internal Wahhabi war.
I mean, you mentioned obviously Dubai. So my understanding is that after going to school in Saudi, You moved to the UAE, is that correct? I know you were in a marriage in the UAE, but was it a straight move to the UAE, or was there kind of something in between?
Yeah, no, straight from Saudi to Dubai.
And so you met this guy, obviously, but by sounding he's not a very nice guy at all. But you met this guy because I know you got kind of caught up in the Islamic marriage rules and caused a lot of problems. But sort of, can you kind of go into how you met him and sort of how this marriage came about?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, I met him through a mutual friend from high school, like, but many years later after I'd gone back to Dubai after university. So yeah, it was probably when I was about 22. And again, because I know, like, obviously my parents were, they're very educated and well traveled, but in the Pakistani community, still, it's kind of frowned upon to be seen to be dating and like to have a prolonged relationship with a man where, that you're not doing this with a view to date. And so it's like once you're finished university, once you're kind of looking for a job, the next tick in the lifeline is to get married.
Yeah,
And it's considered half of completing half of your deen, like your religion in Islam, to get married. So there's a lot of pressure on like, you're not supposed to shop around or date or go traveling and, find yourself. You're actually just meant to get married and essentially have babies and settle down. But because my parents were also leaving Dubai to move to Malaysia, they thought like, according to the culture and how it's going to be seen by others, that they can't just leave me as a single woman in Dubai, like living my life. I need to either be seen to be married or move to Malaysia. And I obviously had a very good job in Dubai at the time, and I didn't want to move to Malaysia. So there was a lot of pressure on me to just do it, but do a whole big wedding so that, the community can see that you're married and it doesn't seem like you're just having a shotgun wedding or something
yeah.
like that. So that's essentially why I had to do it so young.
And is that because on some level you're kind of required to have a male guardian, kind of who's seen as looking over you or looking out for you?
Essentially, yeah, that's the kind of that's the underlying thing behind it is like the Pakistani, even the British Pakistani mentality. I know so many British Pakistani girls, second, third generation here, fourth even now, who are like, they're told that you can do whatever you want once you're married, like whether it's wanting to take a gap year or go traveling somewhere or doing that as a single girl, single woman. You're just branded as quite like loose and not having very good morals, and you're kind of off the rails, and where are you going in life? So essentially once you transition away from your father's house, it's like your responsibility has shifted, and now you're, for lack of a better word, you're your husband's problem.
Yeah.
And there you go. You can once you can start to live your life just to get married. And actually that's something I've noticed here with why Pakistani girls, British Pakistani girls get married so young as well, is just to escape their father's house and have some semblance of freedom, but then end up in, horrible marriages that fall apart or, what have you.
So I mean, you married this man who you didn't really know very well, is the impression I get, and you married him partly because you wanted to stay in the UAE and you wanted to have some freedom. But things started going downhill very quickly, or was there kind of a sort of here where it was working out? How did it go?
Oh no, it went downhill pretty quickly. I would say I was not even married for like a year and a half. And within that year and a half, I was back and forth from the UK. I was back and forth from Malaysia just to essentially like escape from being in his presence essentially. Because yeah, it's I also at this point I hadn't heard of terms that I'm very well aware of now. And like obviously I'm very kind of into this line of work now as well when it comes to violence against women and girls, whether that's psychological, financial abuse, all of these kind of names, gaslight, these terms I hadn't heard before. But I kept feeling this sense that something is very, very wrong. And I kept trying to escape that marriage many times by just, taking trips back towards my family. And obviously without telling them directly what was happening, because I am the eldest daughter. And nobody in my family, my extended family, had been divorced because divorce is so frowned upon within the Pakistani community anyway. But it's almost this mentality of like, you chose this, so you have to deal with the cards that you've kind of got now. And there's a word in Urdu which is like sabr, you're just supposed to have patience that things will get better, or you have a child and things will get better. It's kind of that mentality. So I didn't actually speak up about what was happening to me for a very long time, until one day I actually told my cousin, who's my age, and we grew up together in London. And I was just like, he made me see clearly. He was like, Nuria, you are being royally messed with, like psychologically. And when he said those words, because I realized I just kept being on a loop trying to rationalize what was happening every day as if it was the first time it happened. And he said, if you don't say something now, I'm going to get on the next plane and bring you back to London. And that's when I kind of snapped out of it and was like, right, I need to, because I was feeling so low at that time. I started watching TED Talks on, like, depression and what, almost like suicidal ideation. I've never been that person in my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, then I kind of realized what was happening in these terms, and I was like, I need to get out of there.
And so the man you married, was this a British Pakistani as well, or was he sort of a local Arab?
He had been born and brought up in Dubai, so he had spent
Okay.
his entire life in Dubai. So yeah.
And as I understand it, as you were trying to kind of escape this man or get a divorce, you had problems with the authorities in Dubai. Perhaps you could talk a bit about that.
Yeah, I think that was actually almost as like worse than the marriage, because I actually had faith in the authorities of Dubai. Like, I mean, people still do. When women think of Dubai, they're like, oh, it's like one of the safest places for women, and
Mm.
the police protect you, and if they see you, trying to walk home late at night, they'll actually give you a lift home. And I believed all of this. And I'd obviously never had a run-in with the police previously to that. So what I realized is that once you're married and you're kind of you're both Muslim, so you have to by default use Sharia law. But once you're trying to assert your rights as a Muslim woman, which you don't really have effectively, which I didn't know, because I was a believer and I thought Islam gave women rights and was so honored and all of that jazz. But once you try and do things like say, actually, like my husband is not, letting me live my life. Like he's stalking me, he's following me at my job, he's harassing me through text messages. There's, controlling behavior. He's sending other men to stalk me. They don't take these things seriously at all. If you compound that with, like, I think he's got some mental health as well, because of the way that he's approaching me and the things that he's saying and the moves he's making. Again, they are just like, put a CCTV camera in your house and like call us if it happens again. You do those things, they still don't respond. Their response to that is, maybe you should pray more. And I was like, I actually had to go to marriage Islamic counseling, because I said, I can't do this anymore. I need to get a divorce, because I need my name to be separated from his. And they actually said, like, how many times a day do you pray? And he had convinced them that I had like Islamic demons in me, and that's why I wanted to divorce him. And
Okay.
they were following that line of thinking instead of listening to me and saying, like, I really think there's some mental health there. And like, I don't want to, like, you're forcing me to sit and be in the company of a man that actually scares the living daylights out of me. And it just wouldn't register, to the point where there's only one thing you can enact, which is like a woman asking for a divorce in Islam through the courts is called a khulla, which actually isn't given by any Islamic literature. It's a new phenomenon
Mm.
that modern, like, the Muslim countries have had to enact. So women can do it, but what it means is you forfeit all of your marital rights, like financially and everything you're entitled to, which I was more than happy to do, because I just was like concerned for my own safety. But he had actually got some other lawyer who thought just as kind of in a messed up way as him on how to control a woman and bring her back using some archaic Islamic law, which comes directly out of the Quran. So it was essentially, it's called Ta'az al-Jiyya. I'd never heard of it in my life. But it essentially relates to the disobedience of the wife, which comes directly from the Quran verse 434 about your women and how to discipline them if you fear disobedience. So he was claiming that I had been disobedient because I left the marital home and I wanted a divorce. And therefore, the police had the right to arrest me and forcibly take me back to his house, and I
That's
can't
great.
leave without his permission.
That's awful. I mean, obviously, I get the impression it was an emotionally abusive. But I mean, if someone was in like a physically abusive, that could end in death. That's horrendous.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There'd be no respite for that person.
Yeah, it's sort of proper Handmaid's Tale level misogyny. No, that's just incredible. Sorry. Oh, I should say, but we're probably going to, because I've only got the free version of Zoom. It's probably going to stop at some point. So when it does, I'll just send you another link. So sorry about
Sure.
that. It's just
It's okay.
I didn't know to come up saying we've got about 10 minutes. Yeah. Obviously you were trying to get this divorce. The police were getting involved. Did the police arrest you or try and control you? Or I think they tried to take your passport. Is that right?
Yeah, so they called me to arrest me, but then I had initiated that forced divorce, where I give up everything. So while in the process of that, the police started really like, I mean, I knew my rights in Dubai as a Muslim woman. I was also like playing to my strengths because um, they're not supposed to call you after 10 p.m. for like no male police officer can call you or ask you to come to the police station after 10 p.m. And they would do that multiple times a day. They would call me at like 11 o'clock in the evening. They would call me on the weekends, demanding my presence at the police station. So I would stall it and stall it and stall it. And once they came to my house, again, when I had people over from my new job and my old high school, and it was a mixed gathering, and four male police officers tried to come and get me. And again, I said, first of all, my dad wasn't in town because he was back in England for business, which, according to Islamic law, you can't take me away from my male guardian at that time. And I had moved myself from my husband as a male guardian back to my father. So I said, you can't take me because my dad isn't here. And secondly, there's no female police officer with you. So how can I get in a car with four male police officers gone 10 p.m.? And so they, again, managed to say, okay, come back tomorrow. But because they kept demanding my passport to be handed over to them, and yeah, I lived in Dubai. I lived in Dubai for a lot of my adolescence. I had heard all the horror stories of Brits in Dubai being locked up, having their passport taken away, kind of, been indefinitely rotting in jail until they're waiting for a trial. So I knew like what demanding a passport means because that's your essential freedom. And when it got really bad and they were like calling me during the day to ask for my passport, that's when the lawyer I had hired for the divorce just said to me, they are going to charge you with all sorts of crazy things because you're not playing by their rules. So that's when I did my last minute kind of, I was outside the police station, defeated, so done with all the calls, all the harassment that I was ready to give it over. Um, and I just called like, I don't know by what in my brain, but the emergency number for British expats in Dubai, just because I wanted somebody to know if something happens to me, this was my last known like location, and this is the last thing that they had asked for me.
This is the British Embassy, is it? So a British
Yeah,
Embassy.
so it's like I think it's part of the British consulate in Dubai, and it's just an emergency number that British expats can call if you're going so if something's happened. And I didn't think somebody would even be on the other end of this. I've heard times when the consulate has really let people down, and they've not been there. So I think I just haphazardly dialed it, but thank goodness for me that day, some incredible human being of a man answered, and I within 20 seconds just gave him a snapshot of my story, like a quick rundown that I was married, I'm trying to get a divorce. He's put this ancient law on me. They're trying to forcibly send me back. I've initiated divorce. Now they're asking for my passport. And when he heard the passport thing, he was like, do you still have it? And I was like, yeah, it's in my hand, but I'm outside the station. And he said, just turn the car around and head to the airport. Like, just come back home where this stuff doesn't even matter, but do not hand over your passport. That's what he said. I can't give you any legal advice, but I will tell you, you keep your passport to yourself. Do not hand it over to them. And
Yeah.
I did exactly that. Like, I just turned the car around and I legged it to the airport. Yeah, and I think they were going to put a travel ban on me within the next 12 hours. So I was bricking it all the way through Dubai airport, using my Emirates ID to tap out, thinking, is this going to set off sirens? My mum was there, like, being like, have you left the runway yet? Are you just out of UAE airspace? It was like something out of a movie. It was so unreal.
I mean, do you know what they actually could have arrested you for, or what they could have charged you for?
Yeah, I think there were lots of things because my ex-husband had put in like all these petty crimes. Like he said she had like stolen from the house when I went to like collect my own belongings. They tried to come to my house with four police officers. He'd sent people to spy on me, look at my window. They were trying to do false charges of adultery, which is like the death penalty as well, like or life in jail.
Yeah.
So he was going for like some serious, serious things. That's why my lawyer said just go.
Mm. That's and presumably, obviously you were able to get out because you're British, but presumably for a local Emirati woman or a Pakistani woman, say, who's working in UAE, they probably wouldn't have those options. They would just be trapped in Dubai or trapped in the UAE.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's actually what encouraged me to speak out a lot because I made a fatal mistake. Like, it's a very simple thing where, like, even in Pakistan, but in general in Dubai, because my whole marriage took place in Arabic and the contract was in Arabic. And if I had just added a clause for divorce, it would have saved me so much trouble.
Mm.
And that's essentially what drove my activism when I was just like, hey, ladies, please, you've got this right, not given by Islam, but given by the modern world. Just do yourself a favor and add a clause in your contract saying you have the right to a divorce just as much as your husband does. And you're entirely right, James, because even like I'm not sure if you remember the story of a couple of years ago, the Dubai princess, like the daughter of the sheikh herself, sent the divorce like three times via text message to her husband, which was unheard of because he refused to, and she was like, literally, screw this. I'm like the princess of Dubai. I should be able to get out of a marriage. And even Sheikh Latifa, that fled to London with her kids because she knew that custody would go to the Sheikh of Dubai instead of her.
Yeah.
There's all like at the highest level of the Sheikh's family, these women are trapped and stuck, and they have to flee to London.
So yeah, so at this point, and this was after were trying to get the divorce. Were you still convinced that Islam was the truth, or were you having any doubts?
At this point, I was still very much a believing Muslim. So I completely still had my faith in the religion, and I genuinely thought this was like a due process issue of the
Mm.
UAEs. And I thought this was just men who were on a power trip and essentially were abusing their powers. But yeah, I completely still had faith in Islam in my heart at this point.
And when did you first start having doubts?
So when I got back to England and kind of the dust had settled and I was trying to make sense of my own story to myself and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna get, asked a lot of questions here about what happened to you in Dubai. Um, and then I realized that the the law that had been put on me was actually what they had deemed like a law that came out of Sharia. And I had studied bits of Islamic law. I did a module at university, and I knew that Sharia is divine law and it can only be extrapolated from the Quran itself. Now, as a believing Muslim, I have to believe that the Quran is the, timeless, eternal, infallible word of God. And so I couldn't reconcile the fact that you could get something so dark and twisted that effectively nearly destroyed my life and took away my freedoms from the holy book that I consider my holy book that, is our God talking to us.
Yeah.
So back in England, obviously, when I don't have the controls of my internet being monitored and you can't access certain sites because I'd grown up with not being able to access loads of websites. The internet is heavily monitored both in Saudi Arabia and Dubai. So for the first time in my life, like I actually Googled the Quran. Um, the law that they had put on me, like I said, it's relating to I Googled that word in Arabic. I said, Tahazawjia, what is it? Realized it relates to the disobedience of the wife. Read all these legal pages about how it came about in Egypt and Morocco and how the Islamic jurists have extrapolated that from Surah 434, Surah al-Nisa for women. Went back to the Quran, Surah 434, left the Arabic, Google translated, got it in English in my like first language, read it, was horrified that the Quran says this because bearing in mind I'd only read the Quran twice, but in Arabic. In most like Pakistani households or most Muslim households, I'm assuming, you get this massive party thrown when you finish the Quran, even if it's only in Arabic. That's all you're
Mm.
expected to do. So I was like, there's no way the Quran says like oh, men are a degree above women and they're superior because they're your caretakers. And if you fear disobedience from your wives, you can admonish them, like literally beat them. And I thought this was the one surah in the Quran that protects women. This is what I'd always heard. Like, there's a whole verse in the Quran dedicated to women. Actually, no, it's dedicated to Muslim men, and it reads, "Oh, Muslim men, tell your believing women." So it's
Mm.
actually like the prescriptions for us aimed at men on how to control us, essentially. And that's when kind of like the rug was pulled from under my feet because I realized, like, hang on a second, like, this cannot be this divine Quran that I thought was like some sacred word of God that's come down from the heavens. And then I thought, okay, well, my cognitive dissonance is kicking in, and I still want to be a Muslim because you can't think of a life without Islam. So I thought, you know what? This is probably something really like warped that I don't understand. Maybe Muhammad would have fixed this in his lifetime. Let
Mm.
me go back to like Muhammad's lifetime. Let me read like his sayings and what he did and how he treated his wives and the women in his life. And obviously that was like a double whammy for me because I started reading the hadiths and I started reading the lives of the life of the Prophet. And I started reading about how many wives he had. I read how young Aisha was. I read his threats of divorce to like the women that he was bored and fed up with. And that's when I was like, oh my goodness, this is worse than I was trying to save face of the Quran by going to Muhammad's life, realized it was much worse. And then for the first time in my life, I actually Googled, is Islam the truth? And that's what set me down this rabbit hole. And I was like, I did a whole kind of months and months of research of YouTube videos and reading Islamic pages from scholars and really listening to native Arabic speakers, classical Arabic speakers, and their interpretation of what things mean. So when I realized this verse in the Quran is directly what inspires ISIS, this verse in the Quran is what inspires Boko Haram. I was like, wow, this is, they always put this line between you not being a native Arabic speaker, so you have to defer to a cleric or a scholar.
Yeah.
And I just completely was like, let me trust these other young native classical Arabic speakers and let me take out the middleman. And I want to trust my own mind because I studied law at university. I knew what they had done with the law they put on me and how they extrapolated that. And I thought, if this book can clearly inspire terror, this book can clearly inspire child marriage, this book can, and that's essentially when I was like, no, I am done. And I went, and thank God for the advent of ex-Muslims on Twitter at the time it was called.
Mm.
But that's when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. I'm actually not alone in thinking. Because when you're in that moment, you think, am I the first person to think this entire, 1400-year religion is an actual con of the highest degree?
Yeah. I mean, it's very interesting you're talking about sort of violence and terrorism and stuff. I mean, how much of that, because obviously there's a huge number of Muslims in the world, and the vast, vast majority of them are, great people, completely peaceful. How much of the issue with violence and extremism do you think comes down to interpretation? That is to say, I mean, do you think it's possible to interpret the Quran in a way which is peaceful and inclusive and so on? I mean, not being a Muslim myself, or do you think that there is a fundamental problem with the religious text?
In my opinion, it's absolutely fundamental with the text. Like the only way you can have a peaceful Islam from reading that same book is if you heavily redact multiple parts of it, completely ignore them, which is what most, well-to-do, well-meaning, good citizen Muslims do. Like most moderate
Mm.
Muslims don't know the extent of the Quran. Like I didn't even know what it said, verbatim in my language. Therefore, I would defend it till the cows come home prior to that and say like it's perfect and it's the word of God. But no, because of the concept of abrogation in the Quran, which means that so you've essentially got the Meccan Quran where Muhammad didn't really have any followers and it was quite like to you is your religion, to me mine.
Yeah.
Um, that's all well and good, but then you've got the Medinan verses where he did the hijrah, the migration to Medina, and he's got some more power and he's got some more oomph in his step, and he's being a lot more aggressive, and it's a lot more um, yeah, it's kind of like not even defensive war now. It's kind of, let's go spread this message. All of those verses abrogate the former Meccan verses. So even
Okay.
according to Islamic theology, if there are any peaceful verses, you have to take the later verses as more as the final truth over those. And I think when, you've got these terrorist groups around the world, they know exactly what they're doing when they do. And I mean, think about what they do so precisely, like, cutting off fingertips and beheadings. And there's very direct kind of methods of torture and corporal punishments that they use. It's because it's directly taken from the Quran. So for me, I just don't think the text itself is capable of reform without heavily chucking bits of it away.
But it's very interesting to talk about aggregation because obviously the same is kind of true with Christianity, in that the Old Testament, there's some pretty weird stuff in the Old Testament. So, God wiping out the vast majority of species on Earth because he's angry with humans, apart from like a few who get saved by an ark, all that kind of stuff that you think morally seems quite dubious. But then the kind of the defense is the New Testament comes along. The New Testament is generally quite a bit nicer. It's turn the other cheek and help the poor, all that kind of stuff. But it almost sounds like you're saying Islam's the other way around. So rather than having the bad bit and then the good bit kind of aggregating on top of it, you've got the good bit and then you've got the other bad bit aggregating on top of it. Do you think that's a fair summary?
Essentially, yeah. So whatever, like, peaceful commands you have, and also like when Muslims tell you like the Quran, forbids killing of even one soul, it's a very kind of like misinformed way of presenting that, because you just read the next line and that's not even relating to Muslims. It's talking about the children of Israel,
Mm.
and then it actually goes on to say, if you experience mischief in the land, if someone does mischief in the land of Islam, cut off their opposite hands and like feet, so cut off their limbs essentially. So it's a very like, and I'm sure like presidents, even Obama has quoted that as the reason why Islam is peaceful. And we've got that massive misnomer that Islam is the religion of peace. It's actually, no, the religion of peace is. I'm sorry.
It's very interesting that you're talking about that you hadn't sort of properly understood the Quran until you read it in English. Do you think that's quite common? Because, as you say, I know there's this emphasis on having to read it in Arabic, and of course, a lot of people don't really. I don't even know if it's written. Is it written in? I'm assuming it's written in kind of a dialect of Arabic that possibly isn't even spoken so much anymore. I'm just speculating here, but
Yeah, yeah.
it, I presume there must be an awful lot of people in your position who have never actually read the text literally in a language they understand.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's what keeps a lot of people in the fold of Islam. It's
Mm,
very easy to um like, paint, like, just kind of brush something off as being peaceful and perfect if you haven't got to the nitty-gritty of it in your own mother tongue. And a lot of, like you're saying, um there is no pressure to do that. As long as you can recite the prayers and carry out your 5 daily prayers in Arabic, you are good to go as a Muslim. And I think that's part of the kind of, why Islam is so successful. It was like, Christianity before the advent of the printing press. But, when people started reading it in their own language, there was a lot more skepticism around, things that were written in the Bible, for instance. I think the internet is doing to Islam what the printing press did to Christianity in that sense, because, like I
interesting.
said, when I had these sources at my fingertips, I could go through the entire corpus of the Hadith literature, which, when I was a child, would be on the highest bookshelf, on the highest shelf of the bookshelf, covered in a gold cloth, like it was some sacred, thing directly from heaven that you can't touch without pure purification. And even then, I read it, it's in a, not only is it in a foreign language to me, it's in a ancient version of that foreign language, as you said, that is not even spoken anymore. So you need, there's so much gatekeeping to get to what the text actually says, whereas now you're like, oh my gosh, that's filthy.
Mm. So it would kind of like only being able to read the Bible in Latin would be the equivalent.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, so once you sort of realised that you no longer believed, what did you do then? Did you immediately come out to your family? Because I know that for some people coming out to their family can be very difficult or even sometimes dangerous. Or did you kind of wait a while? Kind of, what was your next step?
I mean, to be honest, your entire worldview collapses, your entire concept of morality collapses. So it's almost like, it's a bit of like an existential rebirth that you go through. So I kind of went through that on a personal level individually. I took time to just be like, wow, if this isn't the truth and this isn't what I associate myself with anymore, then who am I? Especially being
Mm.
a British Pakistani in Pakistan, your only identity really is Islam, because the country was partitioned up, and you're just, that's what people hold on to. So really, what are my values? What are my morals? So I had a few months where I just was on this internal journey and I was just researching, studying more. I gave science so much more importance. I was listening to the likes of Christopher Hitchens and I was just like blown away by how he was dismantling Islam and, other religions as well to boot. But it was like an awakening for myself. So I was no way going to just turn around and say I've left Islam, because also the conversations I had been having at home when I had doubts about, like, let's say I found out Muhammad married Aisha and I was shocked. And I just brought it up at home as in, like, oh, why did Muhammad marry a 6-year-old? The response from my grandma at that time was like, don't you dare kind of question what Muhammad did, because if you don't love him, you'll never be happy in your life. And
Mm,
for me at that moment, I thought, wow, this is some crazy cult mentality that you can't question and your happiness depends on it. So I thought, when I had signs like that of things that I had touched on, I thought, this isn't something you just come out and say to anyone.
yeah.
It's too kind of life shattering, not just for you but for other people. So I didn't say anything. I actually just kind of had my outlet on Twitter, and I put ex-Muslim in my bio, and I just started getting my kind of sanity restored on there. And it wasn't only, I think it was later down the line, my dad actually came across my profile and he cornered me by saying, so are you ex-Muslim now? And I think that's the first time he'd heard of the term. But then I had to own my truth.
Wow, that is some way to get found out. I mean, was he sort of angry or disappointed, or I presume he was? 'Cause I know there are cases where people can get physically violent when this stuff comes out. What was his reaction?
Oh, like sheer disappointment. A lot of, like, is this it? Like, are you actually going to use that label? And, curiously, it wasn't like, what made you become this? What made you leave Islam? There were no questions around that. It was just like, okay, so is this what you call yourself now? And like, what does this
Mm,
mean? And I almost had to defend like why I was using it. And I did. I said, that it's very important that we use this term because we're trying to normalize being able to leave this faith so people don't react like you've just reacted
mm,
when they see it. And obviously, then it was kind of like a bit of a roller coaster, obviously, of, other people, members of my family finding out and me kind of standing my ground, and just never really us discussing religion. Like, you do your thing, I'll do my thing, we'll
yeah,
coexist for as long as we could, until it got to the point where, I started getting more and more vocal and my channel started getting more and more presence and more people were finding out. And, then you'll ask more questions and people are made to feel a lot more uncomfortable, even your immediate family.
yeah.
And then there's obviously the safety element. So yeah, it was not been easy since then.
So are your, because I know some people's family have horrendous. I mean, I've been reading sort of accounts of people whose families has completely disowned them. It sounds like your family, whilst they were not happy, haven't done that. That they're still your family. Is that a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I mean, thankfully, my parents were very, like I said, they're very well educated, and they've brought us up to, use our minds and read. And so I threw that right back in their face. I said, well, you brought us up to question and read, and, not don't believe everything just off the cuff. So that's what I'm doing. I'm following my own mind. I'm on my own journey. This is my decision based off my life experiences. And like, obviously, don't get me wrong, it's been challenging. Like, I've had to distance myself from them and just want to protect them from, other people, or if anybody comes after me, I don't want it to be close to where they are. So I've had to make a lot of life changes, and we've had some serious confrontational moments where, there's been months where it has been frosty between us.
Mm,
But by and large, like, yeah, they are my family and they do understand that. So they love me enough to kind of be like, you know what, this is her truth and she's allowed to speak it. And obviously, being in England and them being, British as well, and going through the
yeah,
education system here, like, you can't muzzle your own daughter in this day. And they know, like, I'm rebellious, I'll just get louder and louder. So
yeah. It's I've always wondered, so it's someone who doesn't really come from a religious background. I've always wondered to what extent, because you were talking about sort of the reaction of members of your family. To what extent do you think the fear of hell is fundamental in why people go along with this stuff? Because I can understand that if you literally believe that your relative is going to be burning for eternity if they don't subscribe to this, that for you is a very, very hard thing to accept. Now, of course, to me, the idea the idea that a compassionate God would burn anyone for eternity sounds barbaric, but the whole thing sounds ridiculous. But if you genuinely believe that, it must be quite hard to kind of get your head around.
Oh, for sure. And this is what I mean. Like, even when my grandma was saying, you'll never be happy if you don't love Muhammad, like, it all comes from this, like, where are we going after this? And do you have kind of like, if we're all in heaven, like, what's going to happen to you, kind
Yeah,
of thing? Because even like my grandfather, for instance, he wasn't very like religious in that he believed in like the Islamic demons and all these things because he was quite a man of science. But even on his deathbed, like he said the Islamic Shahada that you say to get into heaven. And it's like, that's what people aspire to. And even with my own mom, I know like she's literally lets me live her life, but I think deep down it bothers her that if there is an afterlife, which she thinks she really believes in, is my current way of thinking gonna, mess me up in that sense.
yeah.
And I just have to obviously keep reminding them that I don't believe it and I'm okay with that. And, therefore I'm very much like fine on, I'll just be asleep forever. I'm not going to care. I don't know. But I do see that it drives her like prayers or her decisions and her, the way that she comes across in trying to grapple with the way I think.
I mean, yeah, it's such a strange thing to get your head around when you're not from kind of that background. I mean, the idea that there's an all-powerful God who, if you don't worship them, will burn you for eternity just sounds beyond sadistic. But I know some people do believe this stuff, which is, I mean, I'm very interested. You mentioned Christopher Hitchens. So one thing I've noticed, literally in the past few years, which is kind of why I'm doing this, is that there's this growing ex-Muslim movement. It's got influencers such as yourself who are getting significant followings on social media. It's getting lots of people subscribing to Reddit. And so I've met ex-Muslims in real life, and you kind of is Islam possibly having kind of its new atheist moment? Because I mean, there was sort of a time 15, 20 years ago when there was the whole new atheist movement, Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris, etc. And they were really unpicking the foundations of Christianity. Now, admittedly, they probably started from a more secular place than we are with Islam. But do you kind of think that there's something similar is starting to happen with Islam? Because obviously all the new atheists, I believe, were, or pretty much other than Ayaan Ali, were kind of from a Christian, at least cultural background.
Yeah, I'd like to think so. And I think it was Maryam Namazi who first made the analogy, like I mentioned earlier, of the printing press to Christianity is kind of, what the internet is doing to Islam now.
Mm,
These sources, as I said, even growing up, that were once these, mystified things, from the sands of Arabia that we'll never be able to fully understand, are now readily at our fingertips for us to read and research in our own languages. And with the likes of, I think, even the Four Horsemen and, the new atheist movement, it did allow for people to, like, for example, when I was listening to their criticisms on Christianity, that's what initially got me thinking that, wait, hang about, why is my religion immune to this? Like
yeah.
the exact same arguments that, Hitchens or Dawkins was applying to Christianity, even like Sam Harris for that matter, I was like, Islam doesn't stand up to the scrutiny either. In fact, it's far, far, far weaker. And the apologetics are much, much weaker as well. I think Islamic apologetics lent a lot on Christian apologetics for the last 20 odd years.
Mm,
Um, in order to survive this long. But now, when people are getting less and less afraid of apostasy and they're seeing more people come out there and use this label and put out content in every language on YouTube now, there is ex-Muslim content effectively. And like we're using this shared label. If you look at countries like Iran, if you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, the younger population are not accepting just what we've been told previously, also because Islam is so archaic in a lot of its teachings. It just doesn't stand up to the modern day and age. But people are really starting to question, and with, like you said, Reddit and all these kind of forums and chat rooms now, you can find your tribe and realize you're not alone.
yeah.
So I do genuinely think that Islam is having, and this is why it's a great time to be alive, because if we were to get the numbers out of the Middle Eastern countries, which we're not going to get for a long time. But if we were to get the numbers of people leaving Islam, because we're always told like Islam is the fastest growing religion, yes, through birth rates. But if you were to see how many young people are leaving Islam and the rates at which they're doing so, I think that would be an insanely positive bit of information.
I mean, I've heard, I've seen several surveys from Iran, and obviously, officially, Iran is 99.5% Muslim or something. But there have been various online surveys that were done, and sort of they find that actually about 20 to 30% of the population, so something in that region, are kind of atheist, agnostic, spiritualist, but not don't identify as with any particular religion. And obviously we've seen recently in Iran very large and kind of youth led protests against the Islamic regime which rules them. I mean, do you think that could be a kind of a sign of what's to come?
I mean, yeah, I think so as well. I really do. And also, I thought that Iran was majority Muslim as well. But recently I was looking into it, and I think it was about 35.5% Shia Muslim, and then like 2.7% Sufi Muslim, and then like point something Sunni Muslim. So it's not even like a majority Muslim
Mm.
country. There's plenty of humanists, Zoroastrians, Christians as well that make up a lot of it. But yeah, every single Iranian I've met and all the kind of news I'm following on online with the current protests as well is that, you know, a lot of them, and I'm talking even the elder generation, just accepted Islam as their religion because it was kind of enforced, but they actually don't, they don't defend it and believe it in a way that, you know, most other believing Muslims do. It's kind
Yeah.
of just like a cloak they've had to wear. And that's why you see a lot of Iranian Muslims are also not very like good Muslims effectively. You know, they still follow a lot of the other practices. They're okay with alcohol. They love music, they love poetry, all these things which technically Shia Islam doesn't really allow room for. And they're very much kind of more Zoroastrian in their way of thinking. They do certain other practices which most Muslims would frown at, quite frankly. So yeah, and I think honestly, even in Saudi Arabia, the amount of messages that I was getting when I started my activism from Saudi Arabia was insane to me because on the ground it looks like everything is, you know, ticking over as normal, but deep down you see like little like the girls who are going to school being absolutely fed up with wearing this black garb, you know,
Mm.
where the men don't have to, and men have had all these privileges, and they're questioning it, and even men, you know, are like, what, this is unfair. What do you mean? Like, this is kind of such a segregated religion in this day and age. It doesn't work. And so I think the young population now are going to be the kind of torchbearers of either a more kind of, it's going to force Islam to loosen its grip. And it's going to have to like reform in its nature in some way or the other if they want to keep the numbers. But otherwise, I think more and more in people's hearts, Islam is not going to survive the test of time.
That say that it's really interesting. I was going to ask. I mean, do you get contacted by a lot of people then in Muslim countries? Because I know obviously in some Muslim countries, well, a lot of Muslim countries, it's illegal to leave the religion. Some even has a death penalty. Do you get contacted by a lot of people who are like sort of secretly, I no longer believe, and like I'm really grateful for the movement, but personally, I can't come out as ex-Muslim for obvious reasons. Is that something that happens quite a lot, or is it mainly people in Western countries contacting you?
Both, but plenty from Muslim countries, and that's actually what propels you, like me anyway, on a personal level, to keep my activism going, is because when you get messages of people saying, like, thank you for being our voice, because I think the exact same way as you, but I could never, ever say what you're saying where I am right now, and I hope one day I can. But I get messages of people saying, like, I'm under my covers right now with my headphones in listening to you because if my parents were to find out, like, you know, the worst things would happen to me, but they were like, thank you, because I realized like I'm not alone, and you know, I'm not crazy, and there's other people out there. So I think like, and again, the social repercussions of leaving Islam, you know, even if you have slightly liberal parents, it's like their fears of what could happen to you outside of the family or in the wider society, all of this is at play. So it's like that extra hard for people in Muslim countries to just be honest with themselves. I know plenty of people in Pakistan who have to fake fasting all of Ramadan, who have to go to the mosque and fake it and go through the motions, and they write to me and they say like, what do I do? Like this is killing me inside. And
Yeah.
we're just like, well, sing your favorite song, but go through the motions as you do it, and get financially independent and then move away, and you can live life more true to yourself. But they have to go through a lot of kind of living a double life, and I can only imagine how hard that is once the belief, once you've seen the truth for what it is, to go back and pretend is probably one of the hardest things, and I can understand how it's literally soul destroying.
So, looking from the outside, it feels as though the ex-Muslim movement has just sort of exploded in size and in popularity over the past few years. Does that kind of feel the same to you? Do you feel that you're part of a rapidly growing and vibrant movement?
Yeah, I definitely think so. And I mean, I started with thinking, okay, my activism is going to be more relevant to like Muslim women especially, but like Muslims in Muslim countries. Muslim women initially because of my own like divorce issue, which I wanted to warn them about.
Yeah,
But then I just thought, because I'm actually going into like talking about the scripture and what I found so wrong about it, it could appeal to Muslims in Muslim countries who, use a VPN and can learn about the religion from in a language that they can't actually access. But more and more so, even like I realize what I say and talk about in Britain, every single day I wake up to news that makes this activism more relevant, because the way Islam is manifesting itself in the UK right now and all of these issues that we're having, there were times when I thought, okay, let me pack in this activism now because it's actually detrimental for, your life and your safety and your
yeah,
prospects. And like I said, you lose friends, you lose relationships, employers don't want to touch you. But whenever I see the news here, whenever I see what's happening in the UK and this growing threat of Islamism and independent MPs trying to form an Islamic party and running on the ticket of Gaza, it just propels me even more. And it's like, wow, this movement is not only growing, but it's also more relevant than ever, because people are trying to understand, is this Islam? Is this a distortion of the text? Is Islamism different from, like what moderate Muslims practice? And I think that's where ex-Muslim voices are very crucial. I always try and say there's no distinction. The moderate, peaceful Muslims are the ones who are not acting on their religion. If you're a perfectly good Muslim, you will end up like a 7/7 bomber. But yeah, so I think it's growing and it's also more relevant than ever.
yeah. Oh no, no, no! It's very interesting you hold that view. I say I'll have to speak to some sort of, I suppose, kind of moderate Muslim. Um, I don't know if imam is the right word, but just to see what they think of that argument, because I'm presuming there's quite a lot of division on that point. But I guess the last thing I wanted to touch on was kind of how it interacts with politics in the West. So the Western left, I'd say, is very comfortable with hostility to Christianity. I mean, to some extent, it perhaps even encourages it. But clearly, whilst the Western left will talk about championing women's rights and gay rights and every possible minority, it feels like a lot on the Western left are very uncomfortable about saying anything about Islam, which is negative. I suppose they're worried that they'll somehow promote racism or something like that. I mean, has it surprised you how little support you get from the left, and do you kind of feel a bit betrayed?
Yeah, definitely. I did initially, and then I realized that, the left really suffer from, like you were saying, that there's this bigotry of low expectations where they just think anything foreign is, needs to be protected, and it's some kind of exotic religion, and we can't really touch it, despite the fact that, you've got regimes out there killing gay people and depriving women of their rights, like the Taliban. But we see so much silence when it comes to women's rights being deprived in places like that, just because they have some semblance of a connection when it comes to slightly anti-Western narrative. And it's just, you're kind of homeless as an ex-Muslim initially, because you think that the West should be hearing you out the way that they, are so fundamentally against other religions that they claim do the exact same thing. Well, I would say Islam takes the biscuit and does it even worse, yet you're willing to turn a blind eye to it. So it is a very kind of isolating experience as an ex-Muslim initially, because you are like, where do I politically fit in? to this kind of spectrum. But yeah, if you look at history again, like the left historically has always kind of had this blind soft spot for Islam. And it seems to be the same thing that's manifesting itself in the West at the moment.